In this video, we take a look at the Ogalala stitch. Stay with me and I'll show you how. The Ogalala stitch is a beautiful lacy stitch which makes these big fluffy waves. It looks complicated, but it's actually quite simple. So let's get started. For this, I shall be using size 8 seed beads in green and gold. I also have a stop bead. I threaded my needle with about an arm's span of thread, and we pick up our stop bead, slide that down, leaving a bit of a tail, and sewing back up through the bead, locking it in place, and that will stop our other beads from falling off the end. We're going to pick up our first colour, these golds, and we pick up as many as we need for however long we want our piece, but we need to make sure we pick up multiples of 3. For demonstration purposes, I've picked up 45. We slide these down to our stop bead. We skip the first bead, and we sew back up through the second bead. Now we pick up our second colour, we pick up 3, we skip over 2 gold, and sew through the third one. We pick up 3 greens, we skip 2 golds, and sew through the third one. Pick up 3 greens, skip 2 gold, and sew through the third one. Pick up 3 greens, skip 2 gold, sew through the third one. And carry on along the row, picking up 3, skipping 2, and sewing through 1. When we reach the end of the row, we see we're coming out of this bead and we should have 4 beads left over. We skip over the first 2 and sew through the last 2. And already we can see our pattern is twisting in whatever way it wants. That's good. But now we have to turn around and get into position for our next row. Coming out of this gold on the end, we skip over this gold, sew through the next one, then sew through the first 2 greens. So we should be coming out of this green in the middle. For our first row, we picked up our beads in groups of 3. For our second row, we're going to pick up groups of 5. And going back to our first colour, pick up 5 gold. Coming out of the middle of this group of 3, we sew through the middle bead in the next group of 3. Pick up 5 gold. Coming out of the middle of this group of 3, we sew through the middle bead in the next group of 3. Pick up 5, sew through the middle bead in the next group of 3, and carry on until you reach the end of the row. And when we come to the end of the row, we sew through the middle bead of this group of 3, through the next green, down through the next gold, and out through the last gold. We then turn back around and get into position for our next row. We skip over the first gold bead, up through the next gold, through the next 2 greens, and through the 3 golds. So we're coming up through the first 3 in this group of 5. And in the last row we picked up groups of 5. Now we're going to pick up groups of 7. So back to our greens, pick up 7 greens. Coming out of the middle bead of this group of 5, we sew through the middle bead of the next group of 5. Pick up 7 greens. Coming out of the middle bead of the group of 5, we sew through the middle bead in the next group of 5. And we carry on along the row, picking up 7 greens and sewing through the middle bead in the group of 5. And when we reach the end of the row, we sew through the middle bead in the group of 5 and down through the next 2, through the next 2 green, and out through the next 2 gold. Now we turn and get back into position for our next row. We skip over the first gold and sew through the next. Through the next 2 green, through the next 3 gold, and through the next 4 green. So we're coming out of the middle bead of that group of 7. And in the last row where we picked up 7, now we're going to pick up 9. Coming out of the middle of this group of 7, we sew through the middle bead in the next group of 7. And we carry on along the row, picking up 9 and sewing through the middle bead in the next group of 7. Carry on until you reach the end of the row. And at the end of the row, we sew down through the beads on the outside edge until we're coming out of those last 2 gold beads. We then change direction by skipping over the first gold bead and sewing through the next. From here, we can either work our way through the beadwork, tying knots and adding our clasp, or we can keep the pattern going, and we just have to sew back up through the beads on the edge until we're coming out of the middle bead of this group of 9. There's no limit to how many rows you can add. With each row we add 2 more beads. So we started with 3, then 5, then 7, then 9. If we wanted to continue, we would add 11, then 13, then 15, and so on. The more rows you add, the bigger and fluffier the piece gets. And that's how to do the Ogalala stitch.